The idea behind diversity and inclusion has been buzzing in the human resources industry for quite some time. But it's about time that those words are actually included in our churches, and not just the words, but the actual attempt to diversify. And so I have some amazing people with me. We've got Loretta Rodriguez with us, and we've got Pastor Bejoy Samuel, and they're going to sit down with me to talk about church culture. Enjoy.
Well, family, I'm super excited. I don't think you guys know that I'm actually really happy to have you both. Loretta, I'm happy to have you. One, because I always like when we're able to kind of switch up things and somebody who's normally behind the camera comes up in front of the camera. And so I'm really excited about that. And Pastor Bejoy, what some people may not know, you may not even know this, this is like literally one of my favorite pastors.
I love that.
Appreciate
that. So serious about that. And I think the reason is,
I
think the reason for that is because I think that you probably have been one of the most sincere people that I know. And I think your heart is always on display. And so I thought that it would be great to bring you two together and have a conversation about church culture. And I think that normally when we hear that, like, we think about just the way that a specific church kind of operates, but this conversation is a little different than that. I want to kind of kick this off by saying, I remember when the Lord gave me the vision for Fresh Start. And one of the first things that he told me was that it was going to be a group of diverse people, that it was going to be a multicultural church. And for me, I have no context of that. All my life, I have been black, and all my life, surprise, I've been black, and all my life I've grown up in like a black church. Now that's partially because I grew up in a city that is primarily black, right? And so I don't actually have a context for that. So to hear the Lord say that is kind of like, okay, well, where do we go from here? And I'm starting to see it happen, right? I'm starting to see the word of the Lord come to pass. And we'll dig into a little bit more about maybe why some of that is happening. But I wanted to hear really about you two and what your background is. So my background, again, is I grew up in a black church. What's your stories as it relates to church?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I grew up in a mono-ethnic, church. So as an Indian, I grew up in the Indian church. So we had we worshiped in our own language. We had our cultural norms. We did church the way our culture dictated it.
Yeah.
So to transition to a multicultural church was a shock.
Yeah, right.
So there were a lot of changes, good changes, but I think coming from that background, it was definitely a little difficult to transition. Yeah, but that's my background.
Yeah.
Same here. I grew up in a Pentecostal Hispanic church. Spanish services, there was an occasional translation, but there was no catering really to anything besides Spanish-speaking people. So I really kind of sheltered myself in the youth ministry because obviously, most of us either were born here or we came here at a really young age. So we kind of knew more of what was happening in the culture, but the church itself was very, old school Pentecostal and Spanish corritos, all the good things. So coming to Fresh Start was definitely a culture shock. I thought people only shouted in movies. So that was a shock. I was like, this is so cool. I've only seen this in movies. But it's like a fresh wind, and I love it. I think diversity is the Lord.
Yeah. I think I love what you just said at the end, right? Because that was a part of what the Lord had said to me, right? Is that I want my church to look like heaven is going to look like, right? And to think that there's like a black section in heaven or a Dominican section in heaven, it's like that doesn't actually exist. And I think that it requires a level of intentionality, I think, to get there. I don't think that it happens accidentally. But there's a quote that I think is attributed to Dr. King where he said something along the lines of one of the most segregated hours in America is on Sunday morning,
Right,
right?
yeah.
And it's interesting because it's like you would think that would be the time that everybody is actually brought together.
That's true.
But it's the
Right.
time that we actually isolate because really, I think it's a matter of comfort, right? I think we're used to what we're used to,
Right.
and it's going to require some level of discomfort in order to bring other people in. I guess I would ask because we kind of all are in the same boat now where what was our context is not anymore. What do you think is the thing that drew you out of your traditional context into what is now happening in your respective churches?
Yes. Well, I was born in America, so my parents came here as immigrants from India. So, my context and, what I grew up in was America and just having friends that were not Indian. So I had, white friends, black friends, Hispanic friends. So the mix was already there by the neighborhood I was living in, the school system. So to me, that was normal.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think the transition and growing up Indian in church, it was always on my mind, how do I invite my friend to church? They're going to feel awkward.
Yeah.
They're going to feel disconnected. So in my mind, I didn't know how it was going to happen, but that it had to happen, that I couldn't stay in the cultural church. It had to transition in order to reach the community, reach my friends, reach the people that I love, and I want to really bring to Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I think that bridge was needed in order, to bridge that gap between the culture that I grew up in and the multicultural that I was looking for. Yeah.
So your church was originally called, as far as I knew it was called Bridge.
Yes.
Bridge Church.
Oh, wow.
Is that the reason for the name?
Well, sort of. It's
Okay.
a long story.
Okay.
I don't think we have enough time.
Yeah. Okay, because I'm like, I just connected it. Like, is
Yeah,
that what
yeah,
the
yeah.
intention was? What about you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said, Pastor, because that was one of the things that I grew up in that church, like thinking, wow, like I really want to invite my friends, but I would always recommend them to other churches. And
Exactly,
not mine.
yeah.
Because I knew that there was going to be a disconnect, even though there was the occasional like translated services, the culture itself wasn't very current,
Right.
if that makes sense. So I used to always have to like send people. I would like research like what other churches near me or other churches in Queens because I was raised in Queens. So yeah, I was like, how can I bring who I know outside of this church and my friends and family members, who do kind of have a curiosity for the Lord, but they're not gonna sit there and sing coritos all the time or. Like maybe the what was talked about on the Sunday was more towards like the older Hispanic people, So I really wanted something different, and I knew that the Lord put it in my heart to start seeking something different, and then He brought me to Fresh Start.
But what made you open to that experience? Because somebody else could say, hey, that was a
Yeah.
great experience, but there aren't many people that look like me. I'm okay. That was nice. I'm going to go find another church
Right.
that's similar to this, but looks like me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think just like, I'm from New York. I grew up in New York City, so we all have like a diverse group of friends, So I'm like, okay, how am I gonna reach my black friends? How am I gonna reach my Indian friends or my white friends? So there was really something in my heart where I was like, okay, I wanted to do something that of course was of the Lord's and was gospel centered and was like mission centered, and to reach them in a way. And I knew that I couldn't just do that by myself.
Yeah.
So whether that started with inviting people out to concerts, like Christian concerts or Christian conferences, that didn't necessarily have to do anything with my church, but of course we're kingdom centered.
Right.
I think that's kind of what opened my eyes. Like once I started going to concerts, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's people who like don't speak Spanish. Like, oh my gosh, I was part of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in my college, in City College. And that was the first time that I saw Christian Indians. I was like, yo, there's Christian Indians? And they're like, yeah, like it's a whole bunch of us. Like we're all in Staten Island or something.
We live in packs,
And I was like, yo, that is crazy. Like there's Christian Indians.
Yeah.
So I think that's when the light bulb came up in college, because I'm like, wow, there's more.
There's more, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing. We live in a way that is so insulated, right, that we think that there aren't any other people, right? Was it Elijah? I feel like, was it Elijah that was like complaining to God at one point in time? I think it was him. And the Lord was like, hold on, like, you're not the only one. Like, I've got
Literally.
thousands of
Exactly.
others, right? Like,
7,000.
and I think sometimes we feel like it's just us.
I think the challenge for leaders is to recognize that it's not about you. It's easy for us to get stuck in what we like and what we are used to. But if you stick to what you like and what you're used to, you're going to only draw you or people who look like you or sound like you or think like you. And so in order to diversify, it starts with a leader coming out of himself, coming out of herself in order to do what they are uncomfortable with. If you're not willing to get uncomfortable and to learn something new, then your congregation will look just like you and they will sound just like you, and you'll be very limited in terms of the level of growth that you're actually able to attain. And so come out of yourself if you want to come for them.
There's this, what I guess I would consider like some buzzwords that are thrown out nowadays, right? Which is like diversity and inclusion, right? And I don't know that we all really even understand fully what that means. I think we know that there's a need for it, but I don't know that we fully understand what that means. But like diversity is to have everybody invited, right? Everybody is invited, and so everybody can participate. Inclusion is to say that everybody has their own culture, their own way of thinking represented in that thing that you just invited them to, right? Somebody said, I heard somebody say, it's like saying, diversity is saying that everybody's invited to the party. Inclusion is saying everybody has their own taste of music in the party.
Right.
And so I think that what has happened is I think that we have made some advances in terms of diversity. I think we now are open to everybody coming and people sharing in the experience that we've created.
Yes.
I don't know that we're really open to inclusion, right? Because inclusion now says that I have to adjust the party. I've got to adjust the church service to say that there are other people who don't look like me that are in this service. And now how do we cater our music, our speaking, our small groups? How do we include those people in those small groups? Do you all feel like we have gotten to a place where we're actually inclusive and not just diverse?
Wow, that's good. I mean, that's deep. And as you mentioned, it is something that I guess a lot of churches want to have a multicultural church.
Yeah.
And so just for the name,
Yes,
right?
right,
We're
exactly.
a multicultural
Right,
church.
Yes.
that's
This
true.
is what we look like.
Yeah.
But I think until you give other cultures power, it's not multicultural.
Yes, I love
So
that.
good.
Right? And so if a certain race or a certain culture has all the power, it's not multicultural.
Yeah,
Right? So
yeah.
everybody else is just following a certain culture because that culture has the power there. So
Yeah.
they have the power to make decisions, they have power to change up things, so your board is not diverse, right? Right? So the financial decisions are not being made with a diversity, right?
Yeah.
So I think when we think about inclusion, we have to think about some of those power structures, right? Who's at the table, right? And
Yeah.
is that table diverse?
Yeah.
Right? And if not, then you're just trying to show the world that you have a multicultural church, but really you're not.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I think the other part of that is even taking diversity out of just race and ethnicity and realizing that it even includes gender, right?
Yes.
And even socioeconomic status,
That's
right?
right.
It's all a part of being diverse. And I think that we have such a limited scope of what diversity looks like that we almost lull ourselves into believing that we made it. We
right.
now have this multicultural church, which I think, I will just say this as well. I think we have labeled multicultural churches that are really more multi-ethnic than they are multicultural. I think culture goes beyond what people look like or what country that they come from,
right?
And so, I think we're more multi-ethnic than multicultural.
Yeah,
But,
and I think when you said that, I was thinking about age groups too,
Yes,
because I
yes.
feel like a lot of times there's this like cultural gap in between adults and like teens. So then it's like, okay, what do you consider a young adult? What do you consider a teen? And that was something that we really struggled with in my old church, because we had the kids ministry, we had a young adults ministry, but then it's like, okay, so when you transition from like those two and even into adulthood, let's say past like your past 25, there was no real representation, there was no real community resources, teachings to those people. So I even think about like Gen Z now. You know, there's statistics about Gen Z that say that they really just want to be represented in the church. They don't want to just be looked over or just told like, you know, come to church every Sunday, don't have sex, and that's it. Like, we need, you know, like we need to really cater to them and like show them that we do care and really like kind of get to their level of understanding to see what it is that they're into. How can we reach them with the gospel? How can we, you know, tell them that we are interested in their lives and not just their like soul, not just them coming to Sunday services and things like that.
Yeah, I love that you included multi-generational, because I think that's something that can get overlooked sometimes. But I think one of the struggles is, on the flip side of this, is inviting people to the table for the sake of representation, but finding that their level of discomfort keeps them from actually showing up to the table, right? And so I think sometimes it's always like the fault of the governing body, right? That they won't include us, right? But I have experienced inviting people to the table, but because nobody looked like you at the table, or nobody was your age at the table, or nobody was, you know, I don't want to come to the table. And so how, I don't know if you have tips, tools, or something that you've even experienced yourself that speaks to fighting through the discomfort so that things can actually change. I think we have a way of wanting things to change, but not actually being the person to actually inspire the change. And so, I don't know if you've experienced it or can speak to it at all, either of you.
I think my tip is always like, I don't know it all. And it's so good to learn from younger and older people. I feel like we have something to learn from everyone. And that's really like my mindset going into spaces like that. So just being open to hearing what people have to say. I feel like also like when I was a teenager growing up in the church, I didn't feel very heard because it was like, oh, you're just like, you're young, you don't know anything, you know? So just being open to like listening to everyone, no matter what they look like, sound like, no matter their age, is really important.
Yeah, I think, you know, as Jesus came into the world and, you know, that incarnation, right? And he was with the people. And so, you know, that relational piece is so key, right? And when they feel like, hey, I can touch you, you're real, like we cry, we laugh together, like we can have jokes, and like you're not so different than I am. Actually, there's more similarities than differences, you know? Yeah, we may be different cultures and different ethnicities, but we like the same movies, or you know, it's like so we can connect on the similarities, on what we like together, and I think that really bridges that gap as well, you know, and so then people start to become more comfortable because they say, hey, you know, you're just like me.
I think there's this word called adaptability, right? That basically means that based on the environment that I am in, that there may need to be a repackaging of a message or a repackaging of a teaching in order to reach that population of people. I think what some people have done is mislabeled that and believe that it means that you're changing who you are. You don't have to change who you are, but if I'm going to reach a person when you're communicating with someone, the idea is to speak the language of the person that you are trying to reach. And so even this happens even in relationships, that people talk about these love languages, right? We adapt our way of speaking, we adapt our way of communicating in order to reach the person that we desire. So the person that we love, we change to their love language so that we can draw them in. I think it's the same in any environment, whether it's a church environment, whether it's a business environment. I think there are things that we tweak in order to make sure that we're reaching the population of people that we desire. Here's the thing. The only way that you can actually successfully do that is to actually care enough to study that population of people. And so I think a part of this is to be aware enough to know what a specific generation, a specific race, culture, what they like, what they dislike, what's offensive to them, what they will be receptive to. You study them so that you can do what Paul said, to become all things to all men, right? To the Greek, I become a Greek. To the Gentile, I become a Gentile, right? So that I can win just one of them. And so that's the goal. The goal is to just win one. And if I have to tweak some things in order to win one, I will.
Yeah, it's funny because you're talking about, like, we like the same movies. I think the other part is maybe we don't, but you can introduce me to something different, right? I think about my wife. I'm gonna put her on blast. My wife loves African movies, and I'm like, "Are you watching another African movie?" Right? But it took somebody to introduce her to the African movies for her to even know that, oh, I really enjoy this type of movie, and I think that we are. Sometimes we just need somebody to introduce us to a thing, right? For us to really, for it to grab hold. And speaking of that, I feel like, and this is something personally that like we're unpacking and trying to figure out in our church, is the fact that I don't necessarily have to like something or understand something for me to include the something for somebody else, right? And I think that sometimes we are married to our preferences, and then we end up losing like a whole generation of people. So one of the things that we've done, even with, Loretta, we've spoken about, it's clear to us, like there is a call that our church has specifically for the Hispanic population of people. And so we can just take that and say, all right, well, God, do your work. Yeah. Or we can say, wait, how do we now change, or not change, but add elements into our music? How do we add elements into, like, I was like, we joke about this, like I don't speak a lick of Spanish at all. Come on. But, and we, poquito, right? So, but like, I didn't tell you this, but I'm actually on Duolingo now, right? Because it's like, hey, like I got to start somewhere, right? And that may not make me fluent in Spanish, right? But it will help me to be able to bridge the gap between me and someone else. I don't know that we're always willing to actually bridge the gap, right? I think we speak about it, right? But I don't know that we actually will do the work to actually make somebody else comfortable. I think we always expect people to come to us, but we don't expect for each party to come forward so that we can meet somewhere in the middle. I guess what have you all felt like? Have you personally felt like people have met you in the middle as it relates to your ethnicity in the church? And if so, how did it make you feel? If not, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, I remember somebody saying, "Hey, listen, I saw this Bollywood movie," and I was like, "What? You watch Bollywood movies?" And I was like, "I thought only Indians watch it." So, right. It starts to become, something of a connection. Yeah. Say, "Wow, okay, you actually, like things of my own ethnicity and my culture."
I love that.
And I think that's important, that you get to know people, and their culture, and what are some of the things that it's highlighted in their culture. Yeah. Get to know it, like you were saying. We may not like it at the moment, but introducing it, is so key. Yeah. For that bridge, and that connection. So I think that's so critical. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like Pastor Bejoy said, connectivity, and I feel like we're so privileged in New York City because we are so immersed in every kind of culture. I mean, I'm from Queens. It's the most diverse city in the world. Yes. It's stated. And so, we have like a little India, we have like a little Mexico, and little everything. And so I think that just being able to bridge the gap in being in the culture, whether it's like, oh, let's try Dominican food today, or let's try Indian food today, which I love, by the way. And just like being able to relate to people like that. I remember one of the things when I was in youth ministry, one of the things that I really did was like I found out what the girls that I led liked. So if it was bubble tea, let's do a bubble tea Friday. If it was like if they really like to watch movies, let's go watch a movie one day. And just really keeping a relationship. I feel like a lot of what happens in a lot of churches is that discipleship is not relational. So it just becomes like teaching after teaching, which is important, right? We need the word and we need to learn the principles of the gospel. But like, do you know me?
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of, like, you were talking about connectivity, and I thought about how approachable Pastor Morris is. Like, I could touch him, I can joke around with him, I can take pictures of his outfits, which I do all the time.
Every single Sunday.
Because he's just amazing, right? And I think about how in older, Pentecostal churches, it was like you almost had to like bow when the pastor came in, like you couldn't really look them in the eye. It was like a really like, you're up here and I'm down here and I can't really,
Right.
connect with you. So there was a disconnect in that, and I felt like as a leader, I always tried to be very relational. Is that a word?
Relational.
Very relational with the youth and the teens that I ministered to, because I felt like that was important. That was something that I personally didn't have growing up.
So one of the things that I believe I realized is that authenticity is ageless. That when you are authentically who you are, and you show up as that person, that those who are younger, those who are older will all be drawn to that. I think that sometimes we are so busy trying to be something that we are not, that it's no longer attractive, and so we begin to close off a whole generation or a whole group of people because we're trying to be them or be like them. I don't do any of that. I just show up as me, and because of that, I think that when truth shows up, people are drawn to truth. It's like bugs to a light. They're just naturally drawn to what is true.
Yeah. Did you have, because you've spoken a lot about the teens, were you able to bridge the gap between you and maybe older people? And if so, how? And if not, what was the struggle with that?
No. With older people, I feel like no. Only because, if I'm being honest, I really was just not interested because of the way, that either they presented themselves or the way that they weren't interested in connecting with me or bridging the gap with myself. So I feel like that was definitely not the same. It was like I stayed in my own lane, in my own ministry, and anything outside of that, I was like, that's you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you? Have you been able to successfully bridge the gap age-wise?
Age-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have. I think you have to find a place for them, right? I don't think, sometimes, we feel like they're going to mess things up, right? They're too young. If I do it, I know what to expect.
Yeah.
If they do it, I don't know what to expect. I might have to clean it up too.
Right,
And it's going to take longer.
Right.
But, how important it is, right, to raise up the next generation, because we're not going to be here forever.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the work that we do now, all right, is going to pay off later. And so I think finding a place. I grew up in church. I did everything.
Me too.
I was the worship leader. I played the drums.
Yep.
I did everything. And I was like, listen, find a place for people to serve.
Yeah.
They're a teenager, get them on the camera or pro presenter or something.
Yeah.
Do something in the church so that they feel included.
Yeah.
They're part of the team.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be part of a team.
Yeah.
They could be part of the team and celebrate them. Right? So, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's funny you said celebrate them, and I feel like that actually is diversity and inclusion, right?
Yes.
It's a celebration of our differences, and it's not a push to just see our sameness, because I think that sometimes we can rush to the sameness part at the expense of losing our own individuality.
That's true.
Yes.
But I think it's really a celebration of our differences and recognizing that in the context of our sameness, this works.
Yes.
And so I think I want to kind of wrap up with this. I want to hear what your hope is over the next few years as it relates to diversity and inclusion and church culture. What is your hope? Maybe let's start with you, Loretta.
Well, just last night I was actually listening to this pastor preach, and he said something that I didn't really think about. And he said, Jesus didn't have diversity. And I was like, I never really thought about that. Like, in the way that we have diversity today, Jesus didn't really get to experience that. So I feel like we really are living in such an opportunity now in this generation, in this day and age in 2023, where we can see the kingdom through this diversity that we have, right? Whether it's in our church, whether it's in our communities. So my hope really is that we do listen to each other, that we do take from each other in a way where, what can I learn from you? What can you teach me? And I just hope that people are open to it, and they're intentional, and not just for the name, like you said, a multi-generational cultural church, but really because this is kingdom. Like, this is literally kingdom. When I get to heaven, it's not going to be Dominican heaven. Okay? Even though I hope that they have some chicharrones or something. But I think it's going to be such a beautiful picture, and I don't want us to miss out on that here.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. My hope is really, that there is more of a celebration of diversity and, just including people, because I feel like today we still have, the ethnic churches, which I feel like there's a place for that, but I think as we're, meshing and things are kind of progressing, there's a need for inclusion. Like, people are really far from God, and there are many cultures, and even when we start to do that, we can actually reach more people in the world who are lost, right? When we start to be in diverse circles, now we're thinking about missions, we're thinking about including other countries, other cultures. I want to reach this people group who don't know Jesus, right? So if I'm just in a monoethnic church, I'm not thinking outside of my group. But when I'm part of a kingdom culture, right? Then I'm thinking, okay, more groups need to hear the gospel, more ethnicities need to hear the gospel. And so I'm also thinking about being a missionary. So when I'm out there, I can connect with different people, because that's what I experienced in my church. So I don't feel awkward now,
You're equipped.
Exactly. I don't feel awkward, right? So I think that's powerful, just to even empower people to have conversations with people that don't look like you.
I think my hope is that we won't invite people to a service that we wouldn't invite to the table. I think we have a way of saying, hey, come be a part of what I'm doing, but not be included in what I'm doing. And so my hope and my desire is that shifts, that we begin to be more open to a need for people to see themselves. I think it's nice when you are looking into, the leadership of your church, to be able to see somebody who looks like you, and who has a similar background to you, and know that is present amongst a lot of other different things. And so that's my hope, is that there's more intentionality, I think is the word that I want to use. I think it's about being intentional to make that happen. It won't happen by osmosis. It won't happen from just our prayers alone. It's going to happen when we intentionally bring people to the table, and help them process through their discomfort at the table, and then create opportunities for other people to come to the table.
Yeah,
so,
purposeful.
Get purposeful. And I pray that every table could look like this table.
Yes,
because this table looks pretty good to me. It looks pretty good. So I thank y'all for doing this. And,
honored.
Excited to talk to y'all, but I'm also excited to eat with y'all. So, hello, it's time to eat.
Where's the food?
Thank you for watching this episode of Talk to Me, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a single thing. We'll see you next time.